All right, welcome back to episode 10 of the Real Raw Truth podcast, Figure and Bikini Competing. We are excited today. We have a guest, Joshua Bruning. I'm saying your last name right?
It's Bruning, but that's
Bruning,
fine.
dang it. Okay, Bruning.
It's all good.
And we're gonna be talking about recovery in athletes today. Sammy and I and Kayla as well, when she's on, we're very passionate about, the health of our bodies. And so we've learned, as you guys have heard in some of our prior episodes, some of us the hard way. But I think, we've all learned, especially at the professional level, what it takes and what you need to do in order to keep your body growing, especially if you want to continue on competing. So let's open it up. I would love to just talk about, if we want to give, maybe one or two things that's happened over the past week in a positive light. Nothing about recovery, whatever's going on. Sammy, you want to kick it off? Tell us how your past 7 days have been.
Well, let's see. I am in Canada, random trip. So I'm here at Pure Muscle Fitness. So it's been good. It's been fun. It's a nice little change. It feels like I'm back in Chicago, like Midwest area, because it's like a summer where it feels like a nice cool breeze versus Florida where it's super hot. I've just been busy with I'm getting a lot of new clients, which is great. Just working on building my clientele again and, just living the life.
Love it. Josh, what about you? How have the past 7 days been?
Pretty good. I got a lot of stuff going on between two small kids and a full-time student at the moment and running my own business. But the most positive thing is my contrast therapy tubs, which I'm sure we will talk about in a minute, are arriving tomorrow. So that means I can start offering some contrast therapy for my clients. And
yes.
That is super exciting. I actually just got my first membership, at least for the saunas. So I'll have an infrared sauna as well, or I already have it.
That's amazing.
So yeah, I'm excited for that.
Heck yeah, sweet. Well, I know that's so exciting, and we will be talking about that. I want to dive deeper into it. For me, over the past 7 days, honestly, coming out of July, it was a little bit of a slower month in a positive way. Like I need to take a little.
You need to chill. You are just always so go. I mean, we all kind of are, but like you're to another level.
I don't know why Agreed. This happens in my life, but I just like to take it all on. But you know what? I'm having a lot of client success, and I'm excited about that. You guys see it all over my social media, but I deal a lot with weight loss resistance, and we know that comes from intracellular inflammation. I get a lot of athletes, people who have competed, bodybuilders, power lifters, CrossFit, and their bodies have just been run into the ground, and now it no longer responds. And so I have about 25 females in that category right now with some amazing results. And it's hard work. Sammy, I know you've been through some weight loss resistance work, and it's no joke. Like Josh, we talk about this sometimes, like it's harder than a prep. I swear, like having to follow certain protocols, especially when there's no real, there's an end goal of health, but not like a show or a meet.
Not physical.
Yeah.
It is really challenging. And, it's cool because, taking your clients through that process, like you said, it's harder than an actual prep. So, you're finally at the phase, I feel like, Jane, so you started coaching 4 or 5 months ago?
Full time. Yeah.
Yeah. Full time. And so I feel like we were kind of talking about this before, you're kind of at that point where you've been working with these people for about 4 or 5 months now, and they're all having really, really good results. So now it's this exciting part because they're actually seeing
Absolutely.
The benefits from it.
Yep. 100%. So just focused on the biz over here, just like you two as well. We'll never not be. All right, Josh, let's intro you. So tell us just a little bit about you. Who are you? What do you do?
That's a great question. I'm still trying to answer for a lot of people. Essentially, I do recovery work for a lot of athletes, general population as well. Usually people that are just passionate about fitness and want to keep their bodies healthy. So it's not your traditional massage therapy. I don't offer just individual modalities. It's kind of what a client needs based on how their tissue is responding during the session. So we might use some grassing, we might use some cupping, we might use some body tempering. We'll definitely do some myofascial release. We might use some Thai massage techniques. It really just depends on how somebody's body is responding. And then I'll be offering contrast therapy, which is a combination of cold plunging, hot plunging, and infrared sauna, at least the way that I'm going to implement it. So my background starts honestly just as a personal trainer. I worked my way into a PTA position, which is a physical therapy assistant for a chiropractor. I did that for a little while. So I have a strong background in biomechanics and corrective exercise. And that's the thing that makes my work different, in my opinion, is when clients come in to work with me, we go through the tissue work, but we spend a lot of time educating them on how they can empower themselves to not get the work done as frequently, because this isn't just a here and now thing. It's not just during your prep thing. It's, well, what are we going to do over the next 20, 30, 40 years? You would ask me a question the other day during our session, and you said, am I always going to deal with my lower back pain? And my answer was, well, are you always going to have to brush your teeth? Like, the answer is yes, right? We all have aches and pains and things that have been developing since we were going through our developmental phases as a child. And if we don't do the movement hygiene, the proper hygienic work, then more than likely, based on our body's compensations because of sports and school and work and, just life, right? Our body's always going to revert back to these things unless we do the proper work. And everybody's body is different. And that's why we can't take a cookie cutter approach. And that's why I don't offer just, oh, I only do this modality, or like, of course there's modalities that I prefer, but it really comes down to what does a client need.
Yep.
I love that you, and I love your background. I love that you have done all of those things because you're really familiar with the body. So I went to school for athletic training, injury prevention, rehabilitation. So it's awesome that you have so many different, avenues, and then now you kind of formed it in your niche. And so you're very client individual with their needs.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yes, thank you. I appreciate
have
that.
your own, do you have your own place in Chicago as well?
So I rent space out of a gym that Jane used to train at in downtown Chicago. And then I'm primarily in Oswego. So I actually work out of my home. So I have about 700 square feet that I work with. So my wife allowed me to turn our 2.5 car garage into the contrast therapy room. Which is exciting. And then what would normally be like a home's den or office, I turned into my my soft tissue room or my studio. So I have a squat rack. I have a lot of corrective exercise equipment in there. And so I get to work right out of the house, no overhead. So right now it works. By the end of next year, I've been meeting with some business partners, and we do plan to get into a commercial space to really start hitting the ground running with the contrast therapy. And then we'll see where the soft tissue work leads, because as of now, that is a me thing. And I, I'm sure, if you've ever tried to bring somebody into your personal training business, or, in the past, it's hard to replace yourself, so you almost have to change the service and what you're offering.
Yeah.
So it's crazy because, Jane, Kayla, and I, we all kind of already talked about it on a lot of our podcasts, and the importance of recovery is so crucial. And, a lot of times us athletes think oh my gosh, we need to train 6 to 7 times a week. We need to go hard. There's no days off, so can you kind of explain the reasoning behind why it is recovery so important, taking rest days, but then also getting manual work done? So yeah, you can foam roll, you can do things on your own, but why is foam rolling and stretching different than actually getting massage therapy and everything that you do? And how often do you recommend going?
Oh, okay. All right. So we might have to circle back. I'm trying to remember everything there.
I don't know if I do either.
Okay. So let's start with, I guess, why is recovery important? You had mentioned a lot of people think they just have to go 6 to 7 times per week. And that's actually, it's not the best advice. We feel like we're going backwards, but our body actually does need time to recover. So we break things down. It sends a signal that things need to repair. And if we don't give it time to repair, then we're just going to continue to break the body down, and eventually we're going to end up with injury, and we're going to end up going backwards. So it really it boils down to your food, your sleep, your nutrition, all the small things are going to depend how quickly you recover. Some people are going to be able to get away with training 5 to 6 times per week, but it really comes down to the intensity, right? So, you can train 7 days per week, right? If you want to label it as training, but 3 of those days should probably be recovery cardio. And the reason for that is because it's going to act like a filter in a fish tank. We all know what happens to the fish tank when you shut the filter off, right? It gets all grimy and gunky. It's gross. Our body acts the same way. So when we do recovery cardio, we pump the heart, which is the filter. It circulates the blood, the toxins, and everything that our body is breaking down, because we're constantly in a state of breaking down cells and proteins, and we're constantly in a state of rebuilding those as well. But the reason why the body work becomes important is it's no different than why a farmer tills their fields and swaps the crops. Like if you plant crops in poor soil, what are you going to reap? Not very much, right? So we got to make sure that we're getting the body work done to make sure that the soil is full of nutrition. So we're able to hydrate the fascia. We're able to hydrate the rest of the tissue that the fascia is intertwining and holding, right? So
Can I stop you really quick? When you say recovery cardio, because I believe in that as well, what do you view as recovery cardio? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So to me, it's zone 2 heart rate training. And to kind of put that into perspective for people, there's something called Maffetone training. And so Dr. Maffetone basically came up with this, like, we've all heard the like 220 minus your age, right? Which isn't it's not great science for heart rate zones. But if you take 180 minus your age, that puts you around like your peak end of your zone 2 before you start using glycogen as the energy. You're still going to be hopefully using fat substrate. And so if we can, for most people, it's going to be probably between like 120 and like 140 beats per minute. And if we can sit at that for probably 20 to, like, I try to do 20 minutes at least as a minimum, but I mean, you could go for, 90 minutes, 2 hours if you really wanted to. Like, our body has what's called a critical power zone, which is basically, think of it as like a battery, right? Like if we constantly put fuel into our vehicle, the battery would keep it going, right? So it's going to be this rate as to which energy is being burned, but also being replenished. And we could essentially, like, theoretically go at that rate forever without doing muscle damage or anything. We all know that we need nutrition and stuff to replenish, but hypothetically, like we could do that for hours and we would be fine.
Wow, that's great.
It's about finding your proper intensity.
Yep, 100% on board with that, for sure. Sorry.
Yeah.
But
No. But I also think it's important to note that, do it, like, switching up the modality, the type of cardio, the machine that you're using is also important, because a lot of people just use the treadmill and then they're holding on to the handlebars, or maybe they use the recumbent bike. And, our body likes movement novelty, meaning like it likes new movement patterns. We need to expose ourselves to different things. So I would encourage switching it up between a rower and a fan bike and a ski erg and the treadmill. And even on the treadmill, like whenever I do a treadmill, it's not just straightforward. Like I'm walking forward for a minute, lateral steps for a minute, backward steps for a minute, the opposite lateral side for a minute, and then back forward for a minute. And I'm in a constant rotation for 20 to 30 minutes. And that's keeping my body moving better. But we need to start thinking about our body moving more rotationally, as opposed to the sagittal plane that we primarily utilize in the gym for sports like bodybuilding and powerlifting.
That's interesting. I always kind of wondered why people always did circles on the treadmill. I'm like, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's good.
It's movement integrity. Like it's keeping the body healthy, exposed to different patterns.
Movement and
I'm gonna give this a try.
I have some different theories. Some of them might ruffle some feaththers, and some of them aren't very popular. I'm perfectly fine with ruffling feathers. I've been doing it my whole life.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, no, I definitely want to try that this next cardio go around.
Oh, you'll like it. It's good. And then put a slight incline to it as well. It'll feel pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's gonna be interesting. I'll give you feedback next week.
You can so I get super intricate with this type of work. Like even on like an assault fan bike, like I'll do only pushing with the arms, and then I'll do only pulling with the arms. I'll do single arm push and pull as well, but also I'll, like, even on the treadmill, like I'll change the intensity. So I'll let myself get to the end of the treadmill, and then I'll explode back to the top of the treadmill quickly as opposed to just doing like a slow step, because there's really 4 things. Like this ties into what we're talking about. There's 4 things that we really need to do to make sure that we're not going to get injured. And this is so important for people that are trying to compete at the professional level, like you guys, right? Like it's so important to make sure that you don't get injured, because how far backwards does that take you? Right? Like, I mean, you recently had a pretty severe injury, last year? Right. So, and you struggled with that for a while, and that's taken you, pretty far back. Like, I don't think you mentioned you were
like a 2-year process, and
right.
then a year of me not actively engaging my glutes, which is a problem.
Sure. So, right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there's 4 things that we need to make sure that we try to incorporate, not just for the sport that you're doing, but for life. Right. And that's going to be your recovery cardio. The other thing is going to be just simply lifting semi-heavy things. I'm not saying you need to go in and lift a 1 rep max, but like we gotta lift heavy things for the bone density. The number one cause of death in elderly people is falling, right? Because their bones are brittle, right? So and this is just for thinking as we get older. The third thing is we need to have movement variety. Right. So that means exposing yourself to the different planes of motion. In my experience, is going to be more transverse, which means rotation, because our body moves. Even when we view a sagittal or frontal plane movement of like up and down, left to right, it's still rotation because we have ball and socket joints. Right. So if you take a rubber band and you stretch that rubber band back and forth, right, this is how we view movement. Right. But if you stretch that rubber band and you twist your hands in opposite directions, this is actually how muscle fibers move as we are moving, right? So it's a helical trajectory. So that means that we need to have more rotation in all of the movements that we're doing. Now
that's interesting, because a lot of times we don't incorporate that, especially like as power
bodybuilders.
Yes. Works. We do like, I mean, I feel like we do the same movements over and over again.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
that's more of an athlete thing, using the rotation, but you need it.
And then the 4th thing is just going to be explosive movements, right? So we got to have those fast twitch motions. Like think about, people that you've heard going to play a pickup game of volleyball, basketball, went golfing, first time in 10 years, 20 years, right? Maybe 5 years, maybe just, they didn't do it for a year. And then they end up tweaking their back, or they end up rolling an ankle, or they end up having, it might just even be a slight knee pain, but then they go, oh my gosh, it's my age, I'm getting older. Like, no, it's not. It's just the fact that we simply stopped exposing ourselves to that movement pattern, right? Like the professional athletes aren't freaks of nature, right? Like when Tom Brady or whoever, like some of the older athletes that are well into their 40s still competing at professional level, they never stopped exposing themselves to the stimulus. And that's how they're able to compete. Yes, our body does take longer to recover the older that we get after a certain point, but it's not the excuse as to why we ache and why we get hurt, right? So, and this all ties into the recovery approach. So, Sammy, the other question that you had was how often should we get this work done? And again, that ties into what your goal is, right? So I was talking with Andrea Shaw last weekend, and she was saying that she gets body work done. And for those that are listening that doesn't know who she is, she's the 3-time reigning Miss Olympia. So she gets body work done 3 times a week, right? Like that's a ton. That's a lot more than I advise my average client. And it also depends on what is the intensity of that body work. And there's a couple of things that are going to factor into that. But what level are you trying to compete at? Because the more that you are helping the body, it all comes down to circulation and blood flow. So the more that you are helping the body get the proper nutrients it needs to heal, then the better you're going to recover. Now, the other thing that I think we should factor in is anybody that's using any type of gear or anything that's aiding the recovery, right? Because naturally their body is going to recover quicker. And that's essentially all a steroid is. A steroid actually helps you recover quicker from a breakdown. If you just took a steroid and you didn't work out, a lot of people don't realize this, but you wouldn't gain anything. You wouldn't lose any body fat. You wouldn't put on any muscle. You would just probably become more moody, right? And that's essentially it. So it's just going to help you recover quicker, right? So somebody that is that is taking performance enhancing drugs might be able to recover quicker and get body work done more frequently. But I think for somebody that is competing competitively, isn't taking PEDs, probably once a week would be good if you're really trying to be competing at a high level. Outside of that, once a month is probably good as well. Again, if you're like in an off season, and then after that, it really just boils down to how good are you at your corrective work, because that's going to help prolong how long you can go in between. But at the end of the day, I don't care how good anybody is at their corrective exercise. We all have things based on what our life and work and things and kids and whatever it is forces us into these positions that we hold for too long. And that's where discomfort comes from. It comes from being in one position for way too long. It's not about good posture and bad posture, as we've been taught in the past, right? It just comes down to an inappropriate dosage of time in a certain position, right? So then once you start realizing what that is, like Jane and I do body work every 6 weeks. And she could probably go a little bit longer. But the point is to not wait every 6 weeks. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I advise my clients to go like generally between like 6 and 10. And because, and that's one, like, I want to respect their time. I want to respect their finances. Like that's the two most important things to me, because time we can't get back. Finances we always can, but we all have goals and things that we want to do. And yes, taking care of our body is important, but that's why I try to empower my clients to make sure that they're able to learn what they can do on their own to save time and more money or place it elsewhere.
Well, Josh, right? I think something that you do a little differently than at least I've experienced, with other practitioners, is one, yes, like you have clients come like every, I think you just said 6 to 10 weeks or 6 to 8 weeks. Talk us through that a little bit more. But you do give your clients corrective exercise, like you give people exercises, whether it's strength or stretches, and not all therapists do that.
Yeah. So at the end of each session, we always go through corrective work, especially more so during first sessions. I've been working with Jane for a while, and we usually will cover some type of like, hey, are you still doing this? Hey, let's maybe try adding this in if something else pops up, because there's a million ways to skin a cat, right? So just because one thing isn't working doesn't mean that something else won't. And I think a lot of people make the mistake of assuming that one thing is the best thing. It's not at all. Like, here's my favorite phrase: everything works, but not everything works for every person. Mm-hmm. Right. And in my experience, actually, a lot of people have just been told incorrectly, and whoever has been giving them advice has left out the devils in the details on how to do a simple Cobra, right? Or in my world, it would be referred to as a McKinsey extension protocol, right? And when you do those things incorrectly and we're not sending the right feedback from the nervous system to the muscles, the body's not going to respond the way that we're expecting it to. So within that 6 to 10 week time frame, the body doesn't always need to stretch. The body might need activation. The body might need to loosen up first and then to add strength and stability later. And, the more you work with people and obviously do your homework and your research, your level of education is going to allow you to make better decisions and get people better results quicker. But at the end of the day, like, one of the things that I love telling people is know what not to do and explore the rest. Research can only take us so far, right? If you really dive into the devils and the details of the research, like I was about to cuss, excuse me. We don't know. We don't know anything about what's going on, right? We don't know anything about cupping. We don't know what's happening with the muscle fibers. We don't know what's happening in myofascial release. We don't know what's happening in the fascial system. Like, we can speculate, right? And that's why it's science. It's ever changing. That's why we have to have continued education in our careers. And it's a beautiful thing, but there's also a lot of things that have been working since like the 50s and 60s that are just now resurfacing, and people are going, oh, I discovered this thing. No, we didn't. It's been there. It just hasn't been popular for a while.
Yeah, it's true. So when you generally, clients are coming to you every 6 to 10 weeks, why is that the time frame? I know you said time and money, but there's obviously something that you do in your work. Also, your sessions are longer. You don't do hour sessions, right? So like,
sure. Yes, that's a good point.
What that looks like.
Okay. Yes. Good questions. So here's my theory, because I don't know for sure. But I do know on like a cellular level, as our body is replacing things every like 90 to 120 days, like our body is, like brand new. Like we're always constantly breaking cells down and growing new ones, right? So it kind of goes back to making sure you have fertile soil type deal, right? So I think that it falls within that timeline, to make sure that we're not allowing toxins to stay in the body, and that we're keeping the tissue hydrated. It actually comes down to a hydration thing and a viscosity thing of the tissue, making sure we have tensegrity in the body, which is basically just a balance of like compression and tension and pushing and pulling. As we move one thing, it's going to affect the other thing. If you look up, like if anybody wants to YouTube or Google a tensegrity model, it's actually pretty cool. As you push on one area, it affects the rest of the model, and that's how our body works, right? If we removed the bones from our body, it would actually still hold its shape because of the fascia. The fascia actually holds the structure of the entire body. If we removed all the muscles are like Nickelodeon slime. They're just gooey, right? So sorry, a little side tangent there. I love the nerdy stuff, right?
I've never even thought of that. You just gave me like a really interesting picture.
yeah, it is. It's funny. It's funny to think about. So like one of the things I try to tell my clients, at least the ones that love geeking out with me when they come in, because I work on a lot of athletes and professionals as well, physical therapists, chiropractors, right? And one of the ways that I view the body is like we have over 600 muscles in the body, and instead of thinking of it as 600 muscles, I think of it as one giant muscle that sits inside 600 different pockets of fascia.
Wow.
Right, and that gives you a better idea of like, okay, this is how my big toe is affecting my back.
Yeah, it's true.
Right. Jane, you had another question in there that I didn't answer yet.
Your session timing, I think minimum you do 2 hours.
Yes, minimum 2 hours, up to 4. I've done longer, but people's nervous systems just aren't able to handle. The average person's nervous system is not able to handle more than a 4-hour session, and even those can be kind of rough because it's not pleasant. Like it is uncomfortable. Some things aren't like excruciating, some things do feel good, but at the end of the day, we need time with the tissue. We have like 3 primary different like layers of tissue, which would be like our elastic fibers, our collagen fibers, and our ground substance, and each one of those takes different times to kind of get to like respond or relax. Elastic being the shortest, and then the collagen fibers are usually going to take like 3 to 5 minutes to respond, and that's usually with like constant compression and pressure. The ground substance is going to be influenced more by temperature, actually, so it kind of acts like jello. So it's kind of gelatinous when we're cold, and then it's more viscous. It's more of a fluid whenever we're warm. But then there's another thing. The other things to consider would be like working with like the superficial layer of tissue, and then we have deep work, and then we have what's called septum or groove work, which is going to be working in the inner linings of your muscles. So if you look at my forearm here, you can see all the different muscle striations, right? And I can get in between that groove, and now when I move and flex my forearm, you can see my finger isn't being pushed out, but I'm actually in between that groove. And that's where we'll make a lot of changes. And that's where fascial restrictions, in my opinion, I often find, and I usually see it on people's legs, right? Like their quad, like our quads, we're so quad dominant, most of us, all the time. And then it just feels like they're just matted and caked together. So I got to spend time.
What kind of massage is that called? Like when you get in between?
A groove or septum.
Okay.
Have you had that done, Sammy?
Like, no, I'm like, can you just come to Florida? Because I'm gonna have to try to tell my massage guy, can you do this?
Yeah. And then the last thing is joint. So like we have to address the joint usually, because the joint controls the amount of tension in the muscle. So the brain sends a signal to the joint sends a signal to the muscle and says, hey, I need you to produce this amount of force. And if the joint isn't stable, then the muscles it's only going to allow the muscles to produce X amount of force because the joint isn't stable. So sometimes we need to, we'll compress the joint, allow the joint to feel very stable. We might do a pre-activation of an area to help the joint feel stabilized and force those muscle fibers to, to activate. And then we're able to get in with a little bit deeper work or a deeper stretch or whatever that might be. So like you can kind of see, like, as I'm talking here, like there's so many different options, and it really just comes down to like, how do you respond as an individual, right? And that will dictate how the session goes.
So like, let's just say like I'm a new client and I come to you, like, how does that work? So do you kind of do like an assessment and then you're like, hey, I think you should do like 2 hours. I think you should do 3 hours. Or do you just kind of be like, you block off 4 hours and then see how their body responds? And then like, take me through like what you would do if I were like a new client. Like,
yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of people, when they seek me out, like they're not just seeking out like a massage therapist, right? Like they are, they've watched my Instagram, they've talked to somebody, they've usually been working with a physical therapist or a chiropractor, and they've hit a sticking point. They're coming to me for something more specific. And so when somebody reaches out, I'll ask them, hey, like, what's going on? Like, what's bugging you? What have you been struggling with? And I'll just ask those general questions. And if they don't have anything that seems too intriguing is not the right word, but it seems too serious, then I'll just send them a 2-hour booking link. Like I advise everybody to start with that, because I'd hate for somebody to get into a 4-hour torture session and then they go, oh my God, I can't do this after the first 10 minutes. And it's not that bad, like I said, torture session, but it's some things can be very painful though. But so I advise people to start with a 2-hour session, and then we can always go back and do a 4-hour session later if needed. But essentially when you come in, I don't have the same assessment process for certain things are the same. Like I'm always going to look at like internal, external rotation. I'm going to see like where there's restriction, whether it's flexion, extension, whatever's going on. We're going to talk about the areas. We're going to talk about, how long has the pain been there? What type of pain is it? Is it more nervy? And we're going to try to figure out, is it a mechanical thing or a structural thing, right? So if it's a mechanical thing, we can clear it up before I even touch you. If it's a structural thing, we need to work on it, right? So a lot of times I'll just change somebody's mechanics and boom, the pain's gone. And it's like, okay, cool. So now what can we work on, right? Because we know that that's going to be the thing that's been causing the pain, or we can predict that that is the thing that's been causing the pain, and we can try to dive into other areas. But then, we'll start breaking down. So when did this pain happen? When did this pain happen? What came first? What sports did you play in the past? What does your job consist of? Do you find yourself leaning this way whenever you drive? Do you find yourself leaning this way at your desk? Because all those things are going to paint a picture and tell me a story, right? Like I can predict, somebody has poor ankle mobility and they're not getting, if they're not getting the proper pronation of the foot, I can predict that their tibia is not going to be getting great internal rotation. They're not going to be able to drag their heel as far up towards their butt. If you're laying supine, they're not going to have as great of internal rotation on that hip. And then all of those things are going to start working its way up the body. So like there's so many things that we can predict just based on one thing. Usually, right? It's not like every single time. But then oftentimes like one hip is going to be higher than the other. If you notice, like you could test it in your chair right now. If you lift your leg up and try to twist it into internal rotation and stick your heel out to the side, you'll notice that one side can do it better than the other. And then I guarantee you, if you scooch back a little bit and you cross your leg up over top of your knee, one leg is going to go, the side of the leg that has worse internal rotation is going to cross over your knee easier.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you guys can try it if you want, but
I was like, wait, can you say it again?
So if you internally rotate your, like just sitting down, if you internally rotate your legs like this, right, just seated, one side is going to do it a little bit easier than the other. You're going to be able to get a further range of motion, right? So I can predict that whatever side has worse internal rotation is going to be more comfortable in my external rotation here. And that's majority of people, not every person. I'm just trying to give an example of like how I can look at one thing and make a prediction on what else might be happening in the body, right? And then that actually helps me work quicker and more efficiently and effectively for people. because then I'm not just blanketly covering things, right? Like I'm not discrediting, or I'm not knocking massage therapy, because it is amazing work, and it's needed, and not everybody needs the type of work that I do. But at the end of the day, when you're an athlete, we need proper tension in the body. So not everything needs to be worked evenly and the same.
Yeah.
You know, like it doesn't make sense. Like, you know, we have imbalances, so why would we work it balanced?
Yeah. Something that I think when I first met you, in my assessment, you had me actually go through certain movements like that I would do at the gym, a squat, a shoulder press. Talk us through that.
Yeah. So again, that comes down to like everything that we were discussing. I wanted to see like what was causing you pain, and for you, because of the nature of your low back pain.
Oh yeah.
You know, there's going to be certain things that I just wanted to see, like, hey, is this movement causing pain? Is this movement causing pain? You know, is it more when you're in an anterior tilt, a posterior tilt? Is it lateral flexion? Is it rotation? Is it, you know, extension? And, you know, so that's what I wanted to try to assess. And again, like it's going to come down person to person and where you're experiencing the pain, because at the end of the day, what I want to do is I want to try to identify where you're having pain, what's the level of pain, take you through the corrective work, take you through the tissue work, have you stand up, test it. Is it the same? Is it better? Is it worse? Okay, it's a little bit better. Back down. Let's go again. Is it the same? Is it better? Is it worse? And then, you know, we're back and forth trying different things. And here's the thing that I try to explain to people that have been working with me for a while, or it's usually the people that worked with me once and then wait 4 to 6 months or maybe even longer, and then they come back in, is like the person that worked on you, Jane, the first time that we worked together is not the same person working on you now. Right. In terms of like my skill set.
Right. Totally.
Like I'm constantly evolving. I'm constantly learning. The approaches that I used back then, I've learned that statistically, people respond a little bit better to a initially a more softer approach, and then or something that's taking a little bit more time if it is a hard approach from the get-go and it's not as fast. And I've learned a lot of different techniques and things to do just because of the hundreds of people that I've worked on since last year.
I think Sammy and I can both attest to that, even in our own practice. You know, what I was doing 7 years ago when I was just learning nutrition is way different than probably anything. I probably don't even do what I did from 7 years ago. So that makes sense. Josh, something that you talk about on your Instagram is, and I might say it wrong, but you'll know what I'm trying to say, is that when people go to the gym and a certain movement doesn't feel right, they just avoid it. So like, let's use the squat, for example. Like maybe I don't feel a contraction, maybe it hurts my lower back, whatever it may be. But I feel like what you kind of say is like the opposite. Like if it doesn't feel right, like you still need to do that movement, right?
Yeah.
Or like, are you asking like if you don't get like activation in like a certain area too?
Yeah, or like a little bit if you can't get the activation. I think that's a little like they're kind of the same, but a little bit different.
Let's take each one.
Okay.
So yeah, one of my coaches, my powerlifting coach, refers to it. He's a PTA as well, and he refers to it as movement aversion. So like we don't want to avoid movement, right? Like our body's meant to move, right? Like we have to squat to get in and out of the car, on and off the toilet, on and off the couch, like up and down from the dinner table. So like if you're struggling with a squat, we want to identify, well, where is the squat hurting you and why is it hurting? Is it pinching your hip? Do you have a femoral impingement, right? Or, you know, what is happening, or an impingement syndrome, right? Like I'm not diagnosing anybody whenever they come in, but I have experience with these symptoms and I go, hey, these are the symptoms and I'm noticing, you know, so let's address that. And so what we can do is we want to identify what is the range of motion that is pain-free, right? And if we start at body weight, we start at body weight. If we use a little bit of weight to create stability, we do that. Or maybe you're changing the tempo of the movement. So maybe you're doing an isometric. Maybe you're doing a really, really slow eccentric motion. I would probably say avoid doing any concentric explosive movement if something is hurting you, right? Because we want the body to feel safe and stable. But yeah, avoiding the motion, because we need to get back to doing that. So we want to like search for millimeters of improvement, right? So we might get stuck at 120 degrees in our squat. And then as we're working our way down to 90, maybe we're able to get to, 119, 118, and that improves like every single round. And then we do that a couple weeks in a row, and before we know it, we're at 90. Of course, we're doing a lot of other corrective exercise to do this, but we're testing where am I having pain, and we're not removing that pattern completely from the nervous system, right? Like that's the most important thing, especially depending on what the goals are. If you're trying, like for hypertrophy, it's not as important, but for somebody like a power lifter, it's very important for the neuromuscular connection. We're not actually getting people view ourselves as getting stronger, when in reality, what it is you're developing a better contract relax ratio, allowing yourself to express a lot of strength that's already there, right? So what I mean by that is like reciprocal inhibition. So as one muscle is contracting, the other is relaxing. So if I tried to extend my arm and contract my tricep, but I didn't relax my bicep, my arm wouldn't move, right? So that limits the amount of strength people are able to express. So when your nervous system develops that contract relax ratio more efficiently, then you're able to express strength more appropriately. I don't know if that's the right way to say it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right?
Something else you said though that is so important, and I think we get caught up, especially in the bodybuilding world, of the aesthetics of what we're doing. Like we do a squat and hip thrust and certain moves because we want glutes or quad, whatever body part we're working on. But to your point, like it's not even just about being strong in the aesthetics, right? Like these are moves we have to do every single day, and you just don't even think about that.
Right.
So I think too, like to bring into like bikini and figure and things like, well, especially bikini. So bikini and wellness. So, we have like a front pose. So we're constantly like twisting to one side. So constantly. And so the biggest thing that I've learned, and I kind of worked with somebody similar to you, but he would told me the same thing. Like I need to work on like the rotation on both sides, because there was one side that was sticking more than the other side. So it's like, we're so focused on like just doing all the things we're supposed to do, but we forget that we're supposed to like have so much movement in all the planes, like you were mentioning.
Right. Yes. 100%. Yeah. And it's not just the rotation happening in your thoracic spine. It's going to be the rotation happening in your hips and the amount of flexibility you have in your adductors, right? So you'll notice as you get into a standing splits stance, the wider you get, the less thoracic rotation you have. Right. So like the better you start improving that range of motion, the more range of motion you'll end up getting in your T-spine over time as well. And then there's different things that we can do to improve rotation and flexion and extension. As an example, like going back to the helical trajectory of how a muscle moves, if we want to improve flexion and extension, we have to improve rotation first, right? Like if I put tension on this rubber band here, and this is as much tension as I can put on it, what's the only way to add more tension without pulling it apart further? It's going to be to twist it, right? So now as I remove that twist and I keep the same amount of tension I had just created, now I'm a couple millimeters further apart, right? And this is the example of flexion and extension versus rotation.
Sammy, I feel like we got to add some things to our
Yeah,
all of us do. It's not just you all. We can sit here and talk about these things, and I can see like for people listening, like you can't see the light bulbs going off, but I can see the light bulbs going off in your all's head. Like, oh my gosh, all of this makes so much sense.
I'm thinking like, Jane, how are you only going to him 4 to 6 times every 4 to 6 weeks? I'd be going weekly.
I know. Oh my gosh.
You need to go more. I'm helping you out.
Gosh, we have a few minutes left. Let's talk about this contrast therapy. It's really big. I feel like it's one of those things that probably came back around.
Yes.
But we know that there's importance in there. Talk us through it.
Yeah. So let's keep it rather brief then. So there's 3 things that contrast therapy helps with. And it's going to be hormonal, it's going to be your physical health and your mental health. So it can help with those 3 things. And there's a lot of different areas that they can be addressing within those things, right? And a lot of like subcategories. But essentially, a lot of people will do contrast therapy and they'll do like a 3-minute plunge in like a tank that's 37 to 39 degrees, and that's great. And it's definitely going to help with those things. And then they'll go and sit inside of a sauna for 30 minutes. Right. And everybody does it a little bit differently. But my thing is, I like to try to take all these different ingredients and let's optimize it. How do we get the best out of it? So a lot of people have heard of like Wim Hof breathing or box breathing, right? We're all familiar with like meditation and what that can do for us mentally. And what it can do for our nervous system. And one of the best ways to experience contrast therapy and get the best result from it, man, we're going to go down a couple different tangents here, so I might have to circle back, but is actually incorporating the breathing with it as well, right? So controlling the breathing, being taken through your breath work, and then also the amount of time and the temperature spent in each tank is going to influence certain things. So everyone has heard of like the RICE protocol: rest, ice, compress, elevate, right? And that was actually retracted by the doctor that came up with that, because we know that for recovery, we need inflammation, right? It's the first step in the recovery process. So we don't want to take away that inflammation right away. So when it comes to contrast therapy, it's actually not something, if you're trying to get stronger and build muscle, it's not something that you actually want to do very frequently, especially during a training season. And it definitely always needs to be done on an off day. So, if you're doing it more for your mental health and your hormonal health, is something that I will be doing every morning, right? Like I'm past my, my days of being super competitive with other people. I'm just competitive with myself, right? So like, it's something I will be doing every morning for my mental health and my hormonal health, and it'll help with physical health, but I'm not going to be putting on as much muscle or strength as I would have after a hard workout, because of doing it on a daily basis. But so essentially when we add those things in, they need to be done in contrast, right? That's why they call it contrast therapy. And the time, so there's like heat shock proteins, cold shock proteins, right? But one of the coolest things that happens when we do contrast therapy, or we ice things, and another thing is voodoo flossing, is another good example of what occludes blood to the area. So we're restricting blood flow to an area. So if we cut off circulation to an area for a period of time, the body goes, oh my gosh, what's happening? Why is there no blood flow going to this area? There must be something wrong. So it immediately starts prepping itself. And when it's able to get blood back to that area, it sends proteins that are targeted towards healing the tissue that's damaged there.
That's
right? So we can do
that-
this back and forth, and we get really cold, we occlude blood, we slow things down, we go back to the hot tub, we sit in there for 90 seconds, we get really warm, we flush the blood, we go back to the cold tank, 90 seconds back and forth. That's how I'm going to run my contrast therapy sessions. And then we can sit longer. Here's where the period of time becomes, based on research I've read, becomes more important. So if we want to penetrate deeper arteries and tissue, we need to sit in tubs, a cold tub, longer, right? And the temperature, does matter. Most tubs sit around 37 degrees. Mine will be at 33 right before freezing. And so you'll be sitting for 3 minutes on your third round in the hot, and then 3 minutes in the cold. And then after that, you get out and you do a 30-minute sauna session. And infrared sauna is great. There's 3 different wavelengths. There's far infrared, near infrared, and mid. And all of those do different things for the tissue. But essentially, it's kind of like a microwave, where it's heating you from the inside out. So most people probably experience a sauna that's close to 200 degrees. It gets very uncomfortable to breathe after a couple of minutes in there. And you're sweating, right? And it feels good. It's mentally, it's challenging, but an infrared sauna might get up to 145. Mine will only get up to 167, but I've never even seen it over 145, because my session's over and I feel great. I'm sweating profusely. I can feel my heart rate starting to go up, but it's not uncomfortable to sit in there. I can still sit in there on my laptop or my phone or work on different things, as long as I'm wiping my hands and my face. But those infrared lights are penetrating, as deep as the joint tissue. And they're also good for healing wounds for people that are like post-surgery, or, you just scraped your knee or whatever. Like that light is actually good for healing wounds as well. And it's just great for promoting circulation and detoxing. So it's just another way to work with the nervous system after we've heightened it, back and forth, back and forth. Now we go and we bring it back and we decompress.
So somebody like, let's take competitors, for example, because that's most of our audience here. Let's say you're in season, you're in a prep, like you're in a 16-week prep. How often would you recommend doing contrast therapy? And would it always be on your off day, or would it be okay if it was like on the opposite end of a day as a workout?
If you were in season, I would probably never advise on the opposite end of the day of the workout, because you're going to attenuate muscle growth. But in season, I would say strive for once a week on the off day. If not, you might be able to get away with twice a week if you're training 4 to 5 days a week and you have, 2 to 3 days off and you have your active recovery and everything as well. But I want to say probably once a week or even every other week. It really just depends on how your body's feeling. If you're already getting other tissue work done, I don't believe it is as necessary. In your off season, I think it's amazing to do at least once or twice a week. I think again on your off days as well.
You said it stunts muscle growth.
Yes, yeah, it will, because it's calming down the inflammation. The inflammation carries all the nutrients and things that our body needs in order to create the adaptation, right? Like when we damage the body goes, oh, I don't want that to happen again. Like now I need to become more resilient, right? So it builds more muscle, it gets stronger. And so we don't want to slow down that process.
By the way, I think that might be, I wrote a few things down today, but you saying that about inflammation was just another light bulb for me, because I was like, hold on, because I immediately think like, oh no, I want that to go away, because I'm thinking of like, intracellular inflammation, it's different, but the same, but you know what I mean? But like, yes, you do, that is part of the healing process.
I'm glad you said that. So like when we have an actual acute or major injury, it is beneficial to ice within the first like 15 minutes of that injury to prevent secondary cellular inflammation, right? But then after that, we really don't want to focus on the icing too much for an injury.
It's a big moment for me.
What is the difference between just doing like cryotherapy and the contrast bath, and when would you advise one versus the other? Because I've done cryotherapy
Sammy,
and whatnot.
Oh, you just froze a little bit. But so full transparency, I do not know. I've read research on cryo and obviously I've read a ton of research on contrast, and my educated guess is that a very similar thing is happening with cryo, but I don't know if it actually has if we have the amount of time to penetrate deeper layers of tissue. Would be my suspicion. So I know they both have been shown to work really well, and honestly, I am looking into adding in cryotherapy. At some point, those machines are just a lot more expensive. But I do like the idea of it as well, because it's quicker, for people that are shorter on time. And mentally, it's not as challenging. You go through it one time for 2 or 3 minutes, and then that's it. Versus doing, a 12 to 15 minute, plunge that's back and forth between hot and cold water.
That makes sense.
So that's my educated guess, is that, it is very similar. But I don't know the intricacies of what would be, super specific on being different.
Wow.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense too.
Yeah.
I agree. You guys, we're getting to that time where we got to wrap up. This is
man.
amazing.
So fast.
I know.
Another
keep
hour.
asking like a million questions.
So we need a part 2, Josh. We might have part 2 coming up.
Yeah.
I'm serious. There's just so much around this, and as bodybuilders, we just think, especially when you're in season, you're in the zone, all you think about is training. But to somebody who's had an injury, and has had to recover from that, recovery work is so important. So is there any last thing that you would say to, the people listening, think bikini figure competitors around recovery?
I would say think bigger picture. Don't just focus on the goal here and now. Because, ultimately at the end of the day, we're all doing the things that we are doing to make us happy, right? Like it's what makes us happy. It's what fuels us and drives us. And what makes us happy is going to shift over time, right? For me, it used to be more fitness. Now it's more of my kids, and, and that's going to shift, eventually at some point into something different with my kids and maybe my business and maybe the way that I'm helping people. And, so I think making sure that you're able to allow yourself the opportunity to shift and become more of a coach and more of somebody that's still able to walk the walk, right? And make sure that you're not just the person that back in my day, I did X, Y, and Z, but you can't do it anymore, right? So I would say, we want to focus on the bigger picture when it comes to recovery. Like, don't just zone in on like, well, this is how I achieve my here and now goal the quickest. Like, take the route that might take a little bit longer, but is ultimately going to be healthier for your body, and that comes with education. So the biggest thing that I see with people is a lack of education, and there's not a willingness to learn more. And this is the last thing, but I see it with coaches and professionals all the time. It's called the Dunning-Kruger model, and you should look it up if you're not familiar with it. But essentially, like, you learn one new thing and you think you know it all. And what he refers to that as is Mount Stupid, because right there, like, you're unwilling to take in new information. And then that is a dangerous position to be in, because then you're not teachable, then you're not coachable.
Dang.
So like, then we need to come back down off top of Mount Stupid there and realize that for every question answered, it should spark 3 more questions.
Yep. You know what? That
learning.
Like, everything you just said is such good advice, especially for first-time bodybuilders, people who have never done a show, because you just dive so deep in and you don't know enough. It's one of the reasons why we started this podcast, to like tell people like, hey, I learned by doing, and that wasn't always the best way. Yeah. Like, take the advice, take all this information and implement it, so that like long term, whether you want to be a competitor or a coach or help others, or just live a really healthy, balanced life. So that's awesome advice. Sammy, any other departing words?
Like, I agree. I think that, you constantly need to be like improving, learning, and taking what from what you're learning from your body, from your coach, everything like that. Like, I've learned so much throughout the process, working with multiple coaches, going through different preps. Like, my body has responded different to every single prep. And like, now I'm going through I just went through a health phase. So it's like, you know what I mean? Like, you're constantly evolving, constantly learning. And like you said, like, you feel like, when you learn something, you think that you know it all, but don't be that person who knows it all. Continue to keep learning.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, I love what you said.
Super important. I love the mindset. It's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Josh, thank you for joining us. This was awesome. A lot of really good information. Well, we'll have to throw it out there and get a part 2 on in the coming months, because I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy this.
Yes, cool. Episode. I'm down. Yeah,
awesome.
Let me know.
And we'll have to put your Instagram down too, and I actually need to follow you. So
yes,
when I'm in Chicago, I'm gonna message you, and I'm gonna get a session in.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Yes, this has been great.
Staying at your house, Jane.
Awesome.
All right.
All right. Have a good one, guys.
Bye.
All right.